Okay, good morning everyone, and welcome to the May 11th, 2012 meeting of the Implementation Committee of the State Allocation Board. I'm Bill Savage. I'm the Assistant Executive Officer, and I would like to have us go around and do introductions. Mr. Gibbs?
Gary Gibbs, California Building Industry Association.
Mike?
Richard Conrad, Division of the State Architect.
Dennis Dunstan, Council of Educational Facility Planners.
Robert Pierce, representing Suburban Schools.
Joe Dixon, Coalition for Adequate School Housing.
Eric Bakke, Los Angeles Unified School District.
Michael Watanabe, Office of Public School Construction.
Paul Hansen, County Schools.
Lee Coop, representing California Association of School Business Officials.
Greg Yakewood, Department of Education.
Thank you, everyone. And we all have OPSC staff in a second. I want to welcome everybody here. I do think that we should be able to get done by lunch, so if you just keep your questions brief. No, I'm just kidding. But I think we should be able to get done by lunch today. But we do have some very interesting topics and some items that are headed to the allocation board, so we want to make sure that the IMP committee has a chance to see those before they go. I wanted to take a second while I have everybody's attention to just let everyone know about some of the items that the State Allocation Board has upcoming on its agenda. We have a very active board with grappling with a lot of the issues related to the school facilities program. We have a meeting of the audit working group. That's a working group of the audit subcommittee of the board, and that meeting is scheduled for June 5th, so an announcement will go out soon for that. We have a meeting on May 30th of the Rules and Procedures Subcommittee of the State Allocation Board to look at updating rules and procedures for the board. We also have a new subcommittee. If any of you were at the Allocation Board meeting in April, the board formed a committee to review the Department of Defense facilities issues that were brought to the board by the California Department of Education and the Department of Defense. And we have a tentative meeting date scheduled for the DoD Facilities Subcommittee of June 11th, 2012. All these announcements will be coming out. I just want to give everybody a heads up here on the committee. Oh, June 12th? Okay, Tuesday, June 12th. Sorry, thank you, Michael. And we also have, as was set up by the chair, a proposed school facilities program review workshop for the State Allocation Board. We don't have a firm date for it yet. Initially, it had been proposed to be on the date of the allocation board, but I believe we're looking at a date in the middle of July and either the week of the 9th or the 16th to set up a time to have a workshop regarding issues and areas of concern of allocation board members and stakeholders regarding the school facilities program and where we might go and evolve under the possibilities of a new bond measure. So as you can see, we have a busy calendar for the board, and it's an interesting time as we segue from the current program and begin to consider how we will have a new program in California. I wanted to ask if there were any other items from the public or from board members regarding items that are not on the agenda. Mr. Dixon?
It's nothing that we can do about it now, but I just wanted to comment on the DIR CMU issue, if I could. On Wednesday, I received an email from OPSC that we had to fill out new 5004s for our projects, which in effect becomes a 3-day letter, 4-day letter perhaps. A 5004 typically requires, as most of us know, typically requires a little bit of work as well as the architect's approval, etc. And we worked it out. I had a phone call from Sue from OPSC, and everything's okay. But it's just an example, I think, of having something come down the pipe that should have been fully vetted before it came down the pipe. Because if we back up a little bit, we had a lot of projects. We got appropriated in December in Santa Ana Unified. And so when we were filling out the Form 100, I think it's called, on the DIR website, the DIR website wasn't ready for it. And that caused a problem. OPSC had to help us with that. Now we have this other part. It just wasn't fully thought out. It was forced too quickly, and it's just an example that, maybe we should slow down on some of these things and try them out and make sure everything works first before we cause all these problems. My fear is Santa Ana is a big district and we're going to be able to handle it. But what if an email went to a district where that person wasn't available? We're dealing with budgets, teacher layoffs, a whole bunch of other stuff. And what if they miss out on this additional grant? Even $10,000 for a small district could hurt. So just a comment. Hopefully going forward, that'll be taken into consideration.
And it sounds like OPSC staff responded and provided a way that you could streamline your submittal in that case. Is that right, Michael?
No, yeah. That's right. No, they did. That part, and Bill, I sent an email to both you and Lisa, and I did receive a call from Sue right away, and it was positive. The point is, it shouldn't have had to happen.
Okay.
Thank you.
Just to clarify, what Joe's talking about is that the May board, what we intend to do is take project apportionments for 38 projects that were apportioned under the priority funding at the March and December board meetings. These projects are all completely apportioned, where they got the cash. All the December projects got full fund releases. What we are doing to the May board is adding the project prevailing wage monitoring grant to all those projects. And what we asked of those 38 projects, they submitted amended 5004 to recertify for their project to say, hey, yes, we can match this additional grant. We do definitely still want it. And that's why we asked for the 4-day turnaround. We are a little bit flexible on that. The urgency is that we do need that confirmation before the May board so we can give you the cash right away. If we don't do that, then you're going to be forced to get onto a future board. So that's what that's for. To your second comment with the problems you're having with the DIR, at the, I believe the July board or the June board, we are taking a follow-up item to the board just to report back on issues districts have had with DIR and this whole CMU process. So we'll probably want to contact you and get some feedback from you as we prepare that report for the board.
Love to.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Michael. And Sue, thank you for working with him to clarify that. So as we consider our first item today, before we consider our first item, I just want to review that we will, for the future work of the committee, we have one item coming back that we know of that will be new for next month. And next month's meeting is scheduled for Friday, May 11th. I'm sorry, for Friday, June 8th. And we have the Sequoia Union item that is related to minimum essential facilities and K-8 schools. And I do also anticipate that we'll be coming back to look at some of the longer-term changes with the project information worksheet, including the high performance page questions. So the first item on today's agenda is related to priority and funding rounds and certifications of when funds become available, and it's often referred to internally in our office as the Oceanside question. Oceanside School District sent a letter to the board requesting clarification regarding fund availability and raising some issues related to how OPSC calculated when funds would be available during a priority and funding round. And I think before I turn it over to staff, I think if we look at this in the big picture context of where we are in the program, this is an extremely important issue for us. The priority and funding rounds and the certifications and the way our cash has been going out and in those rounds, I think, has been very successful. We've had the certifications have worked. We've gotten the money on the street. We've gotten schools construction projects going and jobs created, and I think we're meeting the overall policy goals. And as we've gone through this process, the board has continued to refine the priority and funding mechanism to ensure that it works in an appropriate fashion, in a fair fashion, and in a transparent fashion. I think that's really what we're talking about today. And why is this an issue? In the bigger picture, it's a huge issue because we have $1.9 billion of unfunded approvals that will be going out over the next few years in terms of bond sales, and we also have $1.2 billion of authority remaining, so about $3.3 billion of funds that will be dispersed over the next 2 years or so, let's assume, using the priority and funding mechanism. And there's another piece of it that I think is important too, and that is, and not to steal Jeremy's thunder, but we also have money that comes back into the program that, aside from bond sales that may happen in the spring or may happen in the fall, OPSC's report that they did for the new construction subcommittee earlier this year, just as an example, over the last 18 months, there were 38 projects totaling $41 million that were rescinded due to time limit on fund release. And that's cash that becomes available to the program that's not necessarily available right at the bond sale times. And so the question of when a district is, when the funds are available and what districts are certified to receive those funds is critical. We also have rescissions to costs incurred. Over the last 18 months, 22 projects totaling $38 million were rescinded due to lack of substantial progress. And it's not that we like to see that districts can't make progress, but this is a reality. Things happen. Money comes back to the program, and so I think it's important for us to have our discussion today. And so, framing it in that way, I'd like to ask OPSC staff, Jeremy McCarroll, to start up on the PIF item. Jeremy?
Thank you, Bill. As Bill mentioned, this issue came up sort of as a consequence of one district's position, but over the course of the board's discussion, a few other issues came up. They're all related to the priority funding process, but we're going to try to keep them separate for a moment at least. One, as Bill said, has to do with quote-unquote available funds, essentially when are funds available to be apportioned by the board during a priority funding round. Another issue has to do with request submittals. Should the number of times a district requests an apportionment be a factor in determining where they end up on the list in order to receive an apportionment? And lastly, what are rules related to funds, as Bill said, returning to the program through things like project rescissions, closeout review adjustments? For example, does funding returning to a program from a new construction project have to be apportioned to another new construction project? I'd like to try to tackle that last one first. Hopefully it's the most straightforward. So an example of funds returning to the program, funds are returned to specific restricted funds from which they came. If we'll jump, we have a lot of attachments today, and if you'd like to jump to attachment B on page 5, you can see the summary of the restricted funds. You can see there are different funds within Prop 47, 55, and 1D, but you'll notice they're not labeled new construction, modernization, joint use, things like that. When we're going to apportion funds that have been returned, we make sure those funds go back to their correct restricted fund, and then make sure the new project can be funded from that same restricted fund. So, for example, charter school loans cannot be funded by Build America bonds. That's just a rule of those bonds. So if funds are returned to Build America bond restricted funds, those funds can't be reapportioned for the purposes of a charter school loan. But it also means that funds coming back from a new construction project could go back out to a modernization project, for example. I think before we go any further, I wanted to make sure that that was clear to everybody, or if there are any questions from the public.
I find that strange, because the bond was passed with specific amounts in new construction and modernization, correct?
Correct.
And it's in the ed code with certain amounts of money in new construction and modernization. So how, when the money comes back, can that switch from new construction to modernization?
I think the difference is I think it's the difference between cash and authority, so that cash can go from one pot to the other, but that in the example of cash coming back to the new construction pot, the cash can go back out to modernization, but the authority stays in new construction. How's that?
Well, just to piggyback on it, are you not exceeding the authority for, I don't know how, I mean, depending on what projects, I mean, could you essentially end up providing more cash, in essence, more authority than the program originally called for?
We'll stay within the authority.
Well, that's not what I just heard, so.
Jeremy essentially kind of answered your question, but we're talking about two different things. The chart is outlining the different cash pots we have, not the authority. So yes, EDCO does spell out the different limitations for the authority for each different pot, and as new construction authorities return to the program, it can only go out to new construction projects. What this item is referring to is more about the cash. There's cash tied to that authority. What can we do with that cash? That cash goes back to these different pots, and they can be reapportioned to anything that can access those particular cash. So if cash came back from a new construction 1D project, it can go out to any other project as long as it's a 1D project, provided it meets the certain limitations that's kind of in the footnote. Some of the bonds, like the Build America bonds, we're not allowed to use for administration fees. That's a federal requirement. We have taxable bonds, we have cash, and each of these has their restrictions as they're set by the treasurers.
Still within the authority.
That's still within the authority, correct.
I think I can kind of understand that, but if you had used up all of the new construction authority, say, under 1D, and money came back into the, cash came back into the program, you couldn't then reissue that as modernization because all the authority had been used up, right?
When the cash comes back, the authority comes back with it. The authority can go back out and the cash can go back out. But what the authority is limited to is by the pot set by the program. The cash has different limitations.
Right. The cash goes back to the bond with the limitations of each of the bonds. Okay, so is that perfectly clear? So, all right. So are there any questions or comments from the audience who would like to further clarify that, or questions on that? Because this is a key piece to understanding the question of availability, right? I mean, we need to make sure we understand, because this is what funds are available, and when they're available is partly determined by this kind of basic structure of the bond subfunds and the cash versus the authority. Okay. Continue, Mr. McCarroll.
Okay. Well, with that clear, we'll on to the issue of the multiple submittals. We're at a point where it's possible that districts have submitted requests for priority funding during more than one priority funding round, but because there wasn't enough funding available, they still haven't received an apportionment. So the issue was raised, should those projects move to the top of the list, or if not the top of the list, should they be given some type of higher priority? Currently, the method of prioritizing the list is facility hardships. Those are the projects that relate specifically to mitigating health and safety issues. They're at the top, and then after that, the list is organized by board approval date, with the oldest at the top. And then within one board approval date, the oldest OPSC receive dates are at the top of the list. So hopefully, okay, we're going to try to illustrate this again with attachments. If you want to turn the page to attachments C and D on pages 6 and 7, if you look at the top on page 6, we've got an example priority funding list with 5 school districts, and as you can see, they're organized by board date. Now, in the event that there isn't enough funds available for all these districts, well, let's assume, just for the sake of an example, that there isn't enough money for Coolidge and Hoover. They'll have to or if they want an apportionment as soon as possible, they'll have to submit a request during the next filing period and join the next round's list. But it's possible that, if we turn the page, that there could be projects with older receive dates that then get ahead of them in line. Harrison, Cleveland, McKinley, as you can see, have older board dates. So the question is, should Coolidge and Hoover essentially be higher up on that second list? And that was something the board asked to be discussed.
I'll try to take a shot at it, but just to stimulate things a little bit.
Okay.
Well, I think it's an interesting dilemma, because if you take the Coolidge and Hoover scenario, they're probably moving ahead with their projects. I mean, if you take it in the sense of reality, clearly they filed a fund release, and clearly they want to move on the projects, and clearly they're interested in moving ahead. Maybe they even took the risk of going ahead and creating some kind of bridge loan till they get the state funding. So to the extent that that's the real world, then maybe they should jump ahead. I mean, if they're showing that, there should be some kind of maybe motivation or incentive to support those shovel-ready projects that are moving ahead. And one way to do that is, if they refile again, they should maybe have a new date and go to the top of the list. Clearly, they have more sense of an urgency to move ahead than the other projects that didn't file a priority funding. So I think there should be, I mean, I love to hear everyone's, kind of thoughts on it, but I think there maybe should be some benefit to that group who's moving ahead.
Dennis?
Yeah, if I could understand this, if they weren't funded and they submitted their paperwork for the next round, the only people that would go ahead of them on the list would be facility hardship, and any other districts that had not certified in the first round that were ahead of them on the list that submitted their certification for the second round, correct?
Right. That had an older board date in the
So
first place.
they wouldn't theoretically lose their place in line. There could be a few people that would move ahead of them, but they wouldn't lose their place in line.
Well, effectively, they would lose their place in line, because if projects that didn't go into the first round, that the previous round, say, came into the second round with earlier receive dates,
right.
they would go ahead of them. So they would effectively, it could be pushed down and end up not getting funded, even in the second round. So I think that's really the question that we're kind of trying to talk about here is do we have any issues with the way this is working?
What was the genesis of this? I mean, was there examples out there? I mean, why was the board asking us to look at it again? I mean, I think it's a...
This is a result of, we had some projects that were rescinded back at the end of last year, and we took them to the December board for board approval to get them rescinded. This district was on the priority funding list. They were right near the first project that got missed when we drew the lines. So the thought was that cash became available at the December board when they had a valid cert at that date and time, so that cash should be tied to that certification list. Now the problem is for this district is, yes, we could have given this cash at the January board. The problem is the way our regs are written right now, and we'll get that into that later, is their certifications expired at the beginning of January. So to go to the January board, we couldn't give an apportionment for that project because the certs were considered no longer valid. Now, when the new cert list was open for that 30 days from January to mid-February, projects actually that were ahead of them already in line decided to submit certifications and say, yes, now we would like to participate. So when we did apportionments in March, this district actually got skipped because there were so many projects that added yeses onto the list, which kind of brings up the other point that you had about, they must have an urgency because they've submitted multiple times. Back when we had when we had the priority funding subcommittee discussion on this, there was a lot of interest in maintaining the integrity of the list. It was a known list of, we published in the board who are the yeses and what is the order. The problem with your idea of keeping track of how many times they submit, you no longer have a known list of who's first and who's not. The way we have it now is people can just look at that certification list and just start going down. They know exactly where they fall on the line as cash comes available.
Well, I think one of the issues, it strikes me, is that if you basically said, amended the regulations to prioritize projects that have submitted multiple valid requests, you'd essentially be taking the back end of the previous list and putting it at the front end of the next list, and everybody, it sounds like, right? Isn't that, let's say we amended the regs to say, yes, if you went in before and you were, didn't make the cut, you would go to the top of the next list and everybody else would go under you, right? Isn't that?
Yeah.
And that, if you take it to the extreme, I think.
The problem with that is everyone that submitted a cert in the first round does not necessarily submit a cert in the second round.
Yeah, okay.
And that goes back to, again, to the Priority Funding Committee, is why we have these 6-month windows. There was a desire by some stakeholders, just submit once and it's always valid. But what came out of that subcommittee is, there's staff turnover, there's changes in construction times, can they do it in the fall versus the winter? So that's why we created these 6-month windows, is we wanted people to recertify that, yes, we still can meet that 90-day cert.
But you have this conundrum of the people on the bottom of the list who keep filing for the certification, and then there's never enough bonding authority to fund that full amount. Correct. And so they could keep filing and filing for years, forever. I mean, it could be a situation where there's never enough bonding authority to cover the amount that you certified. And so those people on the bottom could really be penalized by the process we put in place as well. So, I don't know. Yes.
Joe, first.
The potential problem I see in that is I would, kind of taking a look at the list, I would just certify my project in line jump.
How would you do that?
Well, if I'm at the bottom and I want to keep moving up, and I can guess pretty close to what the bond money coming into the program is going to be, I'll just keep certifying that project and jump over everybody.
Well, but you're certifying the bill, right? Yeah.
But, since we have the certification, I would just say that with the certification, then it's still date order based on what's certified for that period. I don't think because you missed out. Now, if cash comes back into it during that certification period, those projects that certified during that period that the cash comes in should be funded.
Okay.
But if you're holding that cash till the next one, then that becomes you're going to talk about that?
Yes,
we're almost taking ahead of you. I'm ready for lunch, man.
I think that the problem that could arise is that you could have a district or a group of districts that's high on the list in date order that didn't certify in one particular time frame, one particular 6-month period, and then a whole lot of people that are way down on the list that did submit during that time frame, and it could keep pushing those people that were high on the list all the way down to where they would never get funded because other people lower on the list are ahead of them. And if we look at how the program would have worked if we hadn't had this issue with the Pooled Money Investment Board, those projects high on the list would have been funded first. And so you're really causing a line jumping here just because of something that happened that was beyond the control of the districts.
Yeah, a couple of thoughts, which I really didn't want to go, but I'm going to open this up because it is going to be a topic in the next 3 or 4 months. You've got another dilemma, which is on that unfunded list right now. You have probably $300 to $400 million sitting there that are not moving forward, that are over 18 months. And you can rest assured it's something we're looking at. I think that from our perspective, we think that's very unhealthy, and it's not consistent with SB 50 in terms of if you're on an unfunded or portion list, you have 18 months to move forward. So what you've got here now is you've got a whole bulk of projects that are not moving forward because they're not shovel-ready. You have a whole other bulk of projects that are shovel-ready that get being blocked and pushed down to the bottom because there's enough of bond authority. So I think we've got another issue that we want to look at, and we're going to probably recommend that you go through the new construction committee, is how do we start moving forward and requiring moving forward that those projects that are sitting there and not following certification, fund release to move forward, what do we do to activate that? And one way I was thinking of doing is what I was suggesting here is that by reprioritizing those projects that demonstrate consistently that they want to build, but for some reason get shorted because there's not adequate money, they move to the top. Because that'll at least accomplish the fact that you're stimulating those that are interested and will motivate those other groups who are at the top now and are sitting there in 18, 24 months and not filing to either, to consider filing, or they get, one of two things need to happen. Either they have to file, or after 18 months they have to be jettisoned from the list, or the third scenario is this scenario, which is those that file for certification move to the top of the list. So.
Eric, you had a comment first, and then...
I was going to comment on Texas.
I just, and Gary, I appreciate all of that, and the struggle, and I agree that's not necessarily following the intent of SB 50, but really nothing we're doing right now is. And so, if you're going to tell a district, you have 18 months and you have to start the project, even though we don't have the cash to give you to match your match, you put a district in a position to be upside down from go should they never receive the funding from the state. So I understand what you're saying, and it does seem weird and it looks weird, but when you have 18 months but the state can't give you the cash you need to start the project because of their inability to sell bonds, it just, I agree, it just changes the game plan altogether. And so we just have to be very concerned with putting districts in that dire position. Lose the money, or somehow sign a contract for a project that you don't have money for. That's pretty dire.
No one is saying sign a contract that you don't have money for. And
well, you said jettison after 18 months. If you don't start the work...
No, we're saying, I'm saying you then have to submit certifying that you will proceed and sign a contract once you receive the bonding funds. So you know.
This is a little bit off topic. But I understand that huge relevancy related to the list and how the list is working. I do.
And I think you have to put it all in context. If you're going to start looking at one part, you've got to look at the implications.
Okay. No, I hear you. Yes.
If we didn't have the priorities in funding, we'd have the certification date, and that would determine the order of when the projects were pursued. We have the priority fundings to get the shovel-ready projects done, and there's no problem. When the money comes in, go to the list, people that are certified, and we've never had a problem with getting the money out to the street. Anything other than that, of trying to manipulate the list, is going to be problematic. It's very simple. And then if you don't make it, you go back to the list, nobody loses their place in line. It's very simple. So I think the process, as it's been done, has been very effective. And making changes to it will be problematic.
Yeah, in the case of this district, they did miss out in December. In March, they missed out because a few projects did pop ahead, and it's looking like the most recent bond sale, they'll get it. So, there's about a 6-month lag. It's unfortunate people moved ahead of them, but, people moved ahead of them, they already had board approvals ahead of them anyways. And as those ones get funded, the district just keeps moving up higher on the list. They never lose their place. They never go back to the bottom. Yep. They are all projects that had board approval before them anyways.
Yeah, I would agree. I don't really think Oceanside, and might just probably not be popular, but I don't think Oceanside missed out on any money since the projects that already had prior board approval were ahead of them on the list. If we're trying to hold to that list, they were never eligible in a way because other people had the opportunity to get the cash. I just don't think we should be changing a process for a situation that really wasn't a problem to begin with, I guess would be the way I'd say.
And I would actually refer the committee back to page 3, which OPSC staff is not recommending amending the regulations to prioritize projects at this time. We're having the discussion. We want to make sure everybody understands the issues. And that said, I'd like to ask if there's anyone in the audience or the public who would like to make a comment or has a question.
Bill, I'm sorry. Can I just ask? I'm hearing some different things, and it's creating some confusion for me, so hopefully that means other people are confused.
No, just
maybe really quickly, could Michael or, staff explain let's just say of conversation, you have $100 million of available cash to issue. People submit their certifications, the whole 90-day rule and everything. How do you determine which of those certification submittals get the $100 million?
Sure. So if you'll flip to page 5, it kind of outlines the different pots that we have. It's kind of important in explaining this. If we have $100 million available, the $100 million is divided amongst all these different pots. It's not in one pot specifically. So what we do is, when the certification round closes, we take all the yeses and we make one clean list with just the yeses, and that's published on our website right on the front page. And you can see all these different yeses there. And we would start looking at the first project on the list and identify what project did they get what proposition did they get the unfunded approval out of? Is it Prop 47? We would go down the Prop 47 category and say, do we have any 47 cash we can give them? Yes. We would plug them in at the next available board, and then we go to the next list, and we just keep going down. We maintain board approval order and date received order the entire time. We don't skip any projects unless they're in the wrong proposition, because we can't help that.
Date received of the unfunded or
the first order on the unfunded list is board approval date.
Okay.
The next, within one board though, they are sorted by date received.
So if you, let's say you had $50 million of Prop 47 dollars, but $60 million in certifications, the $50 million go to the Prop 47 projects based on their date of approval of their unfunded list.
Correct.
Without regard to the certification letter date.
Correct. The certification letter date doesn't matter. We just want to know if you can participate or not. And as long as at the board we're taking your apportionment to the cert's still valid, you'll be the next one. Yeah.
Okay, let's, Richard, you want to identify yourself?
Yes, I'll identify myself. Richard Gonzalez of Richard Gonzalez and Associates. Districts live and die by the lists that we have in front of us. This system of listing the projects has been around for quite some time, and it's what districts rely on. And I don't think we should be playing games of moving other districts up ahead of them, whether they did or didn't certify. The certifications occur when they do. There were provisions when we did the priorities and funding, as I remembered, that said if you were eligible to receive funding in 3 rounds and you chose not to certify in those 3 rounds, you would be then removed from the list. Now, isn't that not in there?
No, right now there's no mechanism to remove districts from the unfunded list. The only way you can really get them off there is to actually have cash to back an apportionment and plug them in. Now, if they didn't submit a certification, that'd be 18 months though to kick them off. But that cash will be tied to that district for that 18-month also. In terms of the magnitude of the problem, I believe there's less than $100 million actually on the unfunded list where a district has said no for every single priority funding round we've had to date. So it's not a huge problem. Most districts participate sometime or another. It's only a couple dozen projects.
$100 million is a lot of money.
Well, and I think Mr. Gibbs was probably identifying this as an area of concern too, and maybe it's a good follow-up item for us.
And I know that it's kind of falls into this other discussion, but I think the bigger issue is only having one apportionment during any one funding round. I think as money becomes available during that funding round, and I know that's probably the next discussion.
That is the next discussion.
The money should be made available.
Excellent. Sir?
Good morning. Lyle Smoot, representing Lyle Smoot Consulting, LLC.
Where's your tie?
I left it the same place you left yours.
Nice.
It seems to me like there is an issue of fairness here. I love that word. Jim Murdoch used to use that word all the time, and I'd laugh at him when he did. Here's a district, Oceanside, I assume. They came in, they signed their certification that they'd be under contract, whatever, and submit their fund release, and they would have received an apportionment except that someone that shouldn't have received an apportionment took the money first. Because the district that said they would satisfy the requirements and didn't is a district that shouldn't have been there in the first place. So that money really should have gone to Oceanside to start with. If the district that wasn't going to meet the requirements...
We're not following what you mean.
Well, okay. District A comes in and says, I've got a $10 million project, and they get $10 million. District B has a $10 million project, but the money was all gone with District A, so they get no apportionment. But District A shouldn't have received that money because they don't meet the requirements, so the money is rescinded. The apportionment is rescinded 90 days later. If they had not submitted their certification that they didn't meet, District B would have been funded.
Okay, and I think I understand what you're saying. I'm not sure how much of a problem that is.
Well, it was a problem for Oceanside.
So that's an actual...
It's an equity issue. They should have received an apportionment. They didn't because some district got the apportionment that should not have received it in the end result.
I'm assuming that the district that got the apportionment that you're saying shouldn't have received it met the requirements, met the certifications, and then had a problem. I'm just assuming.
I'm not arguing what it was.
I don't think you're saying that a district unlawfully certified or perjured itself.
No, I'm not trying to say that at all. I'm just saying, had they known when the apportionment was made that they weren't going to make it, and they had said, oh, I can't make it, so don't make the apportionment, District B would have got the money, and Oceanside would have received the money.
The only difference, at least what I was hearing at the Oceanside, is that there were other schools that were eligible for that funding in that funding period that were ahead of Oceanside that would have been entitled to that money, not Oceanside. And that was...
That's not the way it was explained, at least. Oceanside would have had no basis to come and say, we should have received this money had there been projects on the original list that were far enough ahead of them to take the money.
I would agree that if there were no other projects ahead of Oceanside on that list, they should have been entitled to the money. But as I understand
I don't know the answer to that, but how can Oceanside come and say we should have got the money if they wouldn't have been in line? That doesn't make any sense to me.
The cash that came in wasn't due to projects that certified ahead of them not materializing with the project. The cash was due to cash returning to the program from whether it be interest or audit recoveries, rescissions that occurred in the past. It wasn't for...
Rescissions that occurred in the past were made to districts that technically should not have received that apportionment, and if they hadn't, Oceanside or District B, in my example, would have received the apportionment. It just seems to me like there's a fairness issue here, that if that district should have received an apportionment, except that it went to someone that should not have received it, I'm not making accusations about why they got it instead of not getting it or asking that the apportionment not be made. I'm saying Oceanside, I'm assuming that they were close enough they would have been funded had these 38 projects and $41 million not been apportioned to someone else. They would have been apportioned. If they were, then it's an equity issue, and I believe they should get that money. And it's an easy thing to do if you just say any money that comes back to the program from rescissions, I don't care about interest and all of that stuff, should be apportioned to projects that were on the original list.
So you're saying, just as an example, what you're saying is that if projects were apportioned above Oceanside, they don't perfect, the money that came back right from them, not perfecting, essentially should go to the next projects down right below them.
That were on that original list, exactly.
Yeah.
And that resolves that whole issue.
Some of that cash returned to the program is over 18 months old. It's before Oceanside would even have an application in the door.
You know, I think you're splitting hairs there, Mike.
Okay. You know what I think we should do? Because we're getting dangerously close to needing to talk about when funds become available, and which is the third item. I think that'll...
Can I just, I mean, Oceanside aside, say that fast. The fact that that can happen should be fixed, in my opinion. If money comes back for a funding cycle, it should stay in that funding cycle. So you go back and you look at the list and the money goes to the next first project that would have been funded should someone not be able to realize their certification.
The challenge with that happening...
I'm not even talking about recensions and other things.
The challenge with that happening is last year, at the end of last year, we had a cert period of 6-month window, and there's a list of projects that are tied to that have yeses. And we're trying to tie, in Oceanside's case, what the argument is, that cash should be available to that list. Right now, we have a new 6-month list with a whole different ordering of projects, of who's on there and who's not, and we have cash tied to that project. In July, we're going to have another cert round. So now we're going to have 3 lists and 3 pots of cash. So now you have all these overlapping lists you're trying to manage who gets cash when out of which pot. The current method we do it is, and this comes to when funding becomes available, is we take a look at all our different cash accounts and we just say, hey, we have 100 million available, we have a cert list, who's next in line, and we just go down the list.
It is, again, Oceanside aside. I'm not saying that because it's fun. It's very unfair for a project or projects that don't get funded in a particular certification process if there was truly money there because a district can't properly follow up with its certification. Because you could truly keep following to the end of the list, and gosh darn it, you should have been funded in that first cycle.
Yeah, and you can see each month in the financial reports, you can see the projects that don't perfect from the previous. There's a graph that OPSC publishes every month that shows the number of projects and the cash value from the previous certification, the apportionments that don't perfect.
Could we not just simply look at, we have the original list, the first list of projects that did certify, and if they certified the second or the third round when cash comes available, could you just not go back and prioritize? Or I guess that's what we're talking about.
That's exactly what begs the original question, which is you keep it at the top. Because Oceanside, then, if they certify again in January, no, but I mean, it gets back to original thought. If they certify again in January, then they're right at the top. So when the next cash comes in, they're funded.
Okay, and I think that this is, there's a lot of complexity here relating to this, and it has to do with the third item. So I'm going to turn it over to Jeremy. Thank you, Mr. Smoot, to talk about when funds become available, okay? Because that's a key element of this discussion. Thanks, Jeremy.
Thank you. If we want to go to page 4 now, attachment A, more attachments. Attachment A lays out, and we'll get to that, so just give me a second. It lays out OPSC staff's basic process for making funds available for an apportionment. In this example, the process starts with a rescission. It's followed by an official SAB rescission item. Then there's the restricted fund reconciliation, what Michael had talked about earlier, and that's from the previous, the next page. Staff determines which project may receive the funds. We go down the list. The board item is developed. There's a final fiscal review, and then, and we still have to do all of that 10 days before a board due to open meeting laws. So essentially, all those things have to happen before the funds become available. I think Oceanside's contention had been, I don't want to put words in the mouth exactly, but that first step on attachment A is available, and our interpretation of the regs is that the funds aren't available until everything can be done to the point where we know what project is going to receive those funds and it can get to the next board meeting.
So there's, you've got some time frames in here. You've got 1 week fiscal review, 1 week prior to index, 10 days prior to SAB. So a typical timeline is going to be a month or more. Is that what we're talking about here? So if something becomes available, funds come back to the program, the board accepts them. And it could, go ahead, I'm sorry. No, that's fine. So we're talking really about a month or so of processing time to go through the reconciliation of the bond funds, looking at the next project. So you reconcile where the money goes back to the sub-funds, and then you can start to look at, after the board's taken the action and you've reconciled it, then you can start to look at, okay, if you're inside of a window where you, in theory, could make apportionments, then you'd begin the processing of an apportionment for the next board, and that looks like it takes almost a month itself, right there, 3 weeks.
So the implications of that is that if a rescission happened at the beginning of a priority funding round, staff would be able to complete all of this work and Richard had spoken to it earlier, we could then make an apportionment, multiple apportionments then within that one round. If, however, as in the case with Oceanside, if the rescission doesn't occur until near the end of the round, the work that needs to be done for OPSC to reconcile the funds might not make that funding available until the next round starts.
So we're very clear, though, right now. I mean, one of the things that when I first heard about this situation, my initial thought was, well, the money became available inside a period of time where the Oceanside was certified. In other words, here was December was where the rescission came back. It was very close to the boundary of the certification period. And I naively thought, well, you know, it became available during that period, so you could give it to them even if it took you into the next period because it became available then. So what's wrong with that naive assumption?
Well, it's not naive. That once the next round starts, there's the new list.
That's right. The old list is gone.
The old list is gone, there's the new list, and there are projects now with older board dates that then are higher up on the list that, as we've organized the rounds, are, you know, entitled to that money before a project with an older board date.
Is it possible with the process that you're identifying here, and I think the answer is yes, that if money became available in an early part of a period,
yes,
it's possible that somebody on the list could be, depending upon the time, could be apportioned on the list for, you know, miscellaneous funds that become available during that time frame, correct?
Yes.
The problem with that is, in Oceanside's case, there was enough cash that would actually cover them. But what we're not addressing is, what if there's not enough cash? You're going to tie up this cash for an indefinite period of time because you're saying Oceanside is the first one entitled to this cash, but we don't have enough to give them. So this cash will just sit there rather than take the new list and just start funding down the list.
Okay, that's interesting.
And because we're tying cash to cert list, no cash will ever become available to that original cert list to get them high enough to cover Oceanside. So now you're running into the next cert list where maybe some more cash comes in to possibly make Oceanside whole. The problem is now you have another list of districts say, hey, I'm higher in the UCS cert list. I should be the first one to access that cash.
I think we're forgetting that this whole process, the priority funding, is like hitting a piñata with a stick. And you get the money out, and you cut it off. If you don't make it, you still got certification in the next list.
You got another shot with the stick?
You still got another shot. So.
Except you can go to the bottom.
But it's not discriminatory because the priorities are all based on that original certification.
The original board approval.
Exactly.
Okay.
That's the list.
Okay, any other comments on the process in question and availability? So do you want to go to the next step, which is a review of the increased opportunities for apportionments?
Sure. In our review of the process, we also noticed availability or opportunity to make an improvement. So we're going to go to another attachment, if you would. On page 8, you can see the way the regs read now, filing period, a round ends when the next filing period begins. So, like what happened last January, the filing round ended on January 10th. Or excuse me, I beg your pardon, the priority funding round ended on January 10th. But the new round didn't start until February 10th. So during the January board, there weren't any valid requests. Previous ones had expired and the new ones weren't valid yet. So we're proposing making it's a small change to the regs, but a big impact, and that would extend the round to when the next filing period ends, so that essentially requests would still be valid during that. The real world impact would be that requests would have been valid during that January board.
if you're not following the way just mechanics work and internal processing work at OPSC, right now, the way the regs are laid out now, and it wasn't unintended, 4 boards we can't take apportionments to the way they're scheduled right now, just because of the timing we need. By changing simply one word in the regs, we can cut it down to 2 boards for mechanics to be able to process extra apportionments. And in this particular case, it actually would have helped Oceanside, actually.
Yes.
I filed a certification that was returned to me because you weren't accepting them at that time. Wouldn't it be easier to just take it up to a certain, at any time up to, set a date, and we could file it like in November for a February end date of the certification, similar to ORG, how we do those? I mean, now you have this window, but couldn't we just go up to a date? I could file, let's say you set the dates a couple of years ahead of time, and we could cert for July right now. Just an idea. You don't have to comment. Just make it a little easier.
You're thinking kind of like create cycles almost.
Yes.
You can look into it.
Yeah, I'm not sure why. I understand that the subcommittee said you had to recertify every 6 months, but that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. I think that if a district certifies once that they are ready to go out to bid, unless they come back and they say, no, we're no longer ready. I mean, why should they have to recertify every 6 months? That puts districts in the position of, if they, miss that 1 month window for some reason, they just forget to certify, then they drop off the list. And I don't think that's fair. I think they should be able to certify once. If they get into a position, which I don't think will be very often, if they get into a position where they're no longer ready to go to bid, then they can submit a letter and withdraw their certification. But they should be able to remain on that certified list for as long as they're ready to go to bid.
I think that makes a lot of sense to simplify it.
The challenge, especially for staff, was maintain this list of constantly changing the yeses and nos continually. The first time we did this, one district certified, and we gave out a lot of apportionments to them. We realized, no, they wanted to come off weeks before the board. It was too late. We already provided the apportionments to them. It wasn't found until afterwards. So it's challenges staff to constantly manage that list. And it was the subcommittee's desire when we did this to make sure that these certs were always fresh. That was one of the main components.
But you have to manage it now. You have to manage new ones every 6 months.
We only do it, it's only 2 times a year versus basically daily of managing the yeses and no on this list as people want to cert or don't want to cert.
Now, can't you batch the ones that don't want to cert? Just, through the same date. I mean, you maintain your certification list, and then if people want to fall off of it, that's the date you have. They must submit by, say, January 10th that they don't want to be certified. That would sure simplify the process in reverse instead of cleaning the whole slate and starting all over again.
I guess my point is that going way back to when SB 50 was passed and the regulations went into place, I mean, one of the founding principles of SB 50 was that the lease purchase program was too complex, and we needed a simpler system. And over the past, 14 years now, we have continually complicated the system, and this is just one additional thing that the district has to go through. Let's keep it simple. If we have to have certifications, which I disagree with, but if we have to have those certifications, make it once. And then you don't have to do it every 6 months unless the district pulls their name off the list.
Dennis, I can appreciate, where you're coming from, but I think it's important to remember that we're in a situation where the basis for the board to make apportionments and the ability to have cash available to apportion projects that might have seemed natural, easy, and really not even thought about when SB 50 started has now become, because of the financial crisis and the changing financial situation with the state, completely different. And so we identify processes to do this, and I think this is a process that seems to be working very well. It really kind of came to the heart of what we were trying to accomplish as a state, which is to get money on the street, to get jobs going, to keep schools being built that were ready to go and that were certified. So, I think I can appreciate the complexity here, but it's something that's been, I think, a pretty effective response. What we're trying to talk about today is just making sure everybody here is aware of how it works, maybe some minor things. And I think if you look at what Jeremy just presented, attachment E, and then compare it to attachment F, it's clear that with a very minor change, we can expand the period during which the board can make apportionments and increase the likelihood that school districts can receive funds in a period where they're certified. So, and this is a real simple thing. If you go from E to F, when I saw E, I was like dumbfounded. What do you mean the board can't make apportionments in this window right here? This is crazy. And so I think staff's done a good job of identifying something real simple that we can do to remedy that. Yes, Gary.
To reinforce what you're saying, I mean, this was a new program in response to the issue related to limited bond sales. It has worked really well. The intent was shovel-ready to move projects out. But the intent also, basically, we had a date order. This is a way to jump the date order. So we have addressed the issue of date order, and districts can jump now. The thing, and it's working very well, it's jump based on if you're shovel-ready or not. So it is new that way. It's not, the date order is not sacrosanct anymore in the pure sense. But the second part is it is a new program, and there is a learning curve here. And to the extent we can refine it, given our knowledge and what's going on, I think it's incumbent on us to do, which we are doing today. But there are two big issues that are surfacing. This certification of every 6 months was kind of arbitrary, and it was kind of put in place just to see where we are. But you're seeing problems that are surfacing because of it. So to the extent we can refine that, fine. And then the other part that's also, jumping in is the fact that you've got a lot of projects that are now sitting on that unfunded list more than 18 months. And so we also have to start addressing that too. So I don't think I think the program's great. I think it's just a learning curve, and we're refining it. And I go back to what Dennis said. I think it's a great idea. If you're certified, why are you recertifying? Because that means it's 100% turnover. Everyone has to do everything again, including every district. When in all probability, most districts that certify once are going to want to stay on the list. You're talking about maybe a 1 or 2% of the districts that might drop off, versus you're dropping off 100%.
You brought up a good thing that reminded me, because DOF actually isn't here today, but the 6 months, another important part of tying that was it was supposed to tie to the fall and spring bond sales, to have a known cert list. So one of the things that DOF would like us to bring up is currently the cert rounds start in mid-January and mid-July. But what they'd like us to consider is backing those up to be about mid-May and mid-November instead. And what that'll give us a chance to do is get a known cert list for January 1st and July 1st, which will help DOF in planning bond sales to tie to all the yeses on the cert list. So we'd like to get feedback to that. But yeah, the 6 months was partially tied to bond sales also.
I mean, I think changing it maybe makes some sense, but I think maintaining one list would also solve that problem. I mean, you want to create more and more demand for shovel-ready projects.
Can we get a couple comments from the audience? Yeah, please, come up. Richard, why don't you let the young woman behind you first? Oh, I'm sorry, a member of the committee. Why you guys come up?
Thanks, Bill. I think that OPSC has done a really good job of notifying us when a cert period is about to approach. If you maintain one list, you're going to have to also, about the same effort that you guys put out to tell us, hey, there's a certification period coming, you would also have to follow up with every single district that had a previous certification to make sure they still want to keep their certification, right? Because the penalty associated with keeping the certification and not following through with it is pretty severe. And so I actually, and I'm sorry, Dennis and Gary, I think it's important that districts submit a new certification each period so that they're understanding the quote-unquote promise they're making to the state for taking that money from another district, as Lyle mentioned earlier.
Yeah, you're right. The board's been very honest for a lot of things, whether it be seismic or whatever, to make sure we are really giving districts, notice. And it would be part of our due diligence to constantly check in with districts. We try every single one of our building blocks article. We list the cert periods. It's covered in every one of our COE handout periods. We do an email blast about a month before every single cert period, and right when it opens, we do an email blast too. So yeah, we hope that no one misses the cert periods, but I think it'd be even more work if we had to make sure that it was still valid.
I'm sorry, you guys, so just let me finish with the members of the committee. Yes, go ahead.
I think I'm agreeing with Rob on this one as far as the certifying each time, because I don't know, Dennis, I don't think we forget to certify. I mean, if you've got a project and you're hoping for state funding, you should be very well aware of what's happening with state funding. So a district that's not managing their program very well or not managing their projects, maybe they forget, but that shouldn't be happening. So, and I like the idea of keeping it fresh, and it just keeps us on our toes about it's coming, and we need to make sure we're going with the program. The date thing of extending it 1 month on each one seems like a no-brainer. It's a great improvement. And then I guess, Michael, on the other thing on changing the time of the certifications, was that in the agenda, or is this a new issue?
No, we just found out last night the DOF wouldn't be able to make it.
Okay. Can you add that? Can we add that to this agenda as an item for action, or is it too late to do that?
Well, I think we want to maybe we can discuss it in a second when we're done with this.
Can I ask Michael one question? What's wrong? Right now, you certify the end of August, correct? For example, isn't that enough time for the treasurer to size the bond for? Because the bonds go out mid-November. Isn't that enough time?
DOF just indicated they would like a known list as close to January 1st and July 1st as possible.
That seems like.
Okay. Yes.
Louisa Park, Hancock Park, and DeLong. And I just want to say that I do support extending this to 1 month for funding, and that the board should be able to fund through the next funding cycle. So it would come a long way to resolve Oceanside's issue. And also, I just don't think there's a problem with recertification. I mean, you're basically changing the date in your previous letter, re-signing it and submitting it. And I think it works. It keeps districts on their toes, and it keeps everybody else on their toes.
Thank you.
Richard Gonzalez and Associates. In fact, I kind of side with Gary on this one. I think there should be only one certification, just like we do with medicals. You have an open enrollment period, and a new open enrollment period begins every 6 months. And that once you've certified, the districts that are on this, that make those certifications aren't planning on backing out. When they want to get that money, they want that money as soon as it possibly can be done. And if for some reason a letter doesn't get through to the appropriate signatory in time and back to the OPSC in time, then all of a sudden they're dropped off the list, and they have every intention of going forward with that project just as soon as they get the cash. So I don't think you've got any districts that really have fallen off of the list for the most part. I don't know if you can even count them in one hand, if there are any. But they're going to want to be getting their money within that 90 days, regardless of whether they certified this round, the last round, or 3 rounds ago. That district is still wanting that money today.
Yes.
There are 2 different questions, I think. Maybe I'm probably totally confused on it. So one issue, Gary's wanting, well, there's an idea of certifying once. That's one thing. Another thing is, to me, are we talking about perhaps creating or discussing there's a new certification list that gets totally discarded after that period, and then there's another one created. You folks have probably looked at it, a cumulative list is what we're kind of talking about, right? So have you looked at that and what that would do for how that would play out with the Oceansides or other districts? So you're just adding on to that list, and that deals with when they certified, didn't get the money, they got cut off, and all that. still have to recertify to make sure that you're doing it, but you get added to one cumulative list.
Yeah, right now, we just have one list. It's the one we publish. It's all yeses for that cert round.
But then that gets discarded.
We discard at the end of that cert period and start a new one.
Yeah.
Each time with all the refreshed certs.
Yeah. I don't know, and I'm probably totally confusing it, but I'm not sure how it would jumble out, how it would play out if you said, okay, it's one list, we're just going to keep adding to that list as, yeah.
What? Yeah.
I don't know.
Michael, I'll shut up after this, but my reason and I'd love to hear from more school districts is, if you keep recertifying, it creates this massive roller coaster for those districts that desperately want to start. Because if they file for the first certification and then they're looking for the funding, then they don't get it, all of a sudden they go to the bottom of the list. And there could be a point where they keep recertifying and recertifying and recertifying and never get funding. That was not the intent of this program. If they're certifying, if they go on the list once, then the next time, if they stay on that list, they move to the top. So the probability of being funded out of the second round is much greater if there's only one certification program. If you keep penalizing them and go to the bottom, that reduces that probability substantially.
Let me make sure I understand. If a district has a board date, when they go back on a list with a board date, they get put up where the board's apportionment date is. They don't fall down to the bottom necessarily.
Original apportionment date?
They don't fall anywhere. It's a known list, and we just start going down the line.
Okay, but
they don't move anywhere. It's always the same board approval date.
But if
a few districts might pop ahead of them later on.
Right. Okay, if you've got $2 billion on an unfunded list, and you have a whole group, say $200 million, on the bottom of that list that certify, they then go to the top of the list, correct? I mean,
they'll move up quite a bit.
Right, by date or status
of them, yeah.
But if there's not adequate bond funding out of that round, they then go back to the bottom of that.
They're not at the bottom. They're where they were. The $2 billion above them are gone, and they just keep moving up farther.
But in this case, for example, there was $700 million, so there's still $1.3 billion ahead of them. If you start, I mean, there's $1.3 billion ahead of them. So the probability of them being funded in the next round is relatively low. Okay, at the beginning, let's say there was $2 billion, and you've got the guy at the bottom. There's $2 billion ahead. We sell $700 million this round as an example. There's now $1.3 billion ahead of them.
Right. They moved up the list.
So where's their certainty of being funded in that next round?
There's no certainty at all.
But if they were at the top of the list, okay, because if they're on the list that was certified, the top $100 million, then the probability of them being funded in the next round is greater than being at the bottom of the list. That's what I'm saying. I mean, it's...
Yep. Okay. Dennis? I'm sorry, Joe.
Well, we kind of switch gears here a little bit, but what I wanted to clarify was the reason why I would like to have one certification is that we work with an awful lot of small school districts, and small school districts in particular have limited facility staff. And and they have you may have a superintendent that is doing a lot of different jobs, and things fall through the cracks. And it's not because they're incompetent, it's because they have just a whole lot of stuff to do. If they could certify once and be on the list forever until they get funded, it would be, and there are an awful lot of small school districts out there. I think, 50% of the school districts out there are small school districts. And so it would help, I think it would help those school districts out if they only had to certify once. They didn't have to keep track of this every 6 months. In terms of what Gary was saying on modifying the SAB approved list, I'm not in favor of that. I think we should maintain the integrity of the SAB approved list.
Mr. Dixon, I think was, sorry, Rob, you're next.
No problem. Thank you. He forgot me twice, so that's all right. I think I'm in favor of what Rob offered too, that we have this certification process, that's fine, and it should be those projects certified based on the SAB approval date. I just think that if the certification list became a new list, priority list, and I have one at the bottom, I'm going to certify it, knowing that it's not going to get funded on that bond sale, and I'm going to line jump. I'm going to game it. Well, not me personally, but I know some people that might. But potentially that could happen, you know, where you certify, let's say you're at $2 billion down on the list, and you know there's probably $1 billion coming into the program, but you're going to certify it knowing, you know, you're not going to get it right then, but you're going to be jumping up. I just think that could happen. In Santa Ana, we certify all our projects. We're ready. So if that was a process, we'd get all the money.
But isn't it also the case that you have a large local bond, so you're able to keep your projects going?
Sure.
Too?
Sure.
Yeah.
But again, it's that SAB unfunded date is important.
Yeah. And
certifying every 6 months, it's a letter. You know, we send a letter in, and OPSC does a great job of, as you guys have talked about, of notifying us of those dates. So I don't think it's a problem.
Okay. Rob?
I think everyone said what I was going to say. I would just say we could totally bifurcate the whole recertification issue from where you stand in priority funding, right? I mean, you can still certify, but if we're going to have a conversation about if you were the first one not to get funded on the last priority funding round, you should be the first to get funded on the next priority round. That's a separate issue from if you're submitting another certification letter.
Yes, it certainly is, yes. Any other comments? So, Jeremy, could you just briefly take us to attachment H, unless you already did, the reg change?
Sure.
Did I miss that one?
No, it's fine. Yeah, page 12, we're reordering one sentence that we think adds a little clarity to have requests must be physically received by the OPSC by the 30th counter day to be considered valid, followed by requests considered valid are valid until the next filing period ends. And again...
And it used to say begins?
It used to say begins, so there was that gap, and we think ends closes that gap so that more board meetings can potentially approve apportionments.
It would help, I think, is what was represented. Okay, good, thank you. So as everybody on the committee is okay with that, and it seems like it makes sense, pretty straightforward. So if we wrap this up, what I heard, well, actually, Michael, could you expand a little bit on, so what Finance was asking for was an adjustment of the actual times of the certification so they coordinated more appropriately with when the bond sales were? Is that kind of...
Right. Well, what the regs say right now on that page on the third and fourth rows, it says the periods begin the second Wednesday of January and the second Wednesday of July. In order to do what DOF would like, having the cert periods ready, we needed to have the cert round be the second week of November, and that way 30 days would end about the second week of December. That would give us 2 weeks to compile the entire list, account for mail to come in, and give that list to them on January 1st. I don't know if that would cause districts heartbreak in terms of when they can provide us cert or not for that time window instead of what it is now.
November, what was the second one?
Then instead of the second week of July, it would have to be the second week of May going to about 30 days in mid-June. And then that would give us 2 weeks to get them on July 1st list.
Okay, and so I don't think it doesn't strike me as, if we're going to have the 2 rounds, it doesn't strike me as a big deal, Lee?
The only caution I would do, I mean, I don't have a problem with changing it, except that we've just been talking about districts forgetting to recertify and do all this stuff, so that first transitional year would be really important to really blast everybody, because now you're changing it up, so.
What are the dates now they have to certify by?
We could change it to, we can change it to second Wednesday in May and second Wednesday in November. We could probably put hard dates if that makes it easier than counting 30 days for everybody. I don't know if it makes a difference, but still the 30 days.
Anything that makes it more likely that we'll get money on the street for districts to do projects in to facilitate the process seems appropriate. So you'll come up with something modifying the regs slightly to include that too. Perfect, okay. And so we can potentially, after we discuss this with the chair, we could consider taking the reg change to the meeting in June, potentially, right? Should be able to do that. Any other follow-up? So what I did here as some of the other follow-ups in this discussion, obviously we had the discussion about a single certification period. I'm not sure that's, something where we're going to make any headway right now, kind of mixed. But I did hear the discussion in terms of a follow-up that Gary brought up, which is the unfunded list aging projects is how I was terming it, and a future discussion with the board about that. Okay. Any other comments, questions, or concerns on this item before we close on this one?
I think the aging projects will probably come up when the board has their second July meeting, when they do the program review. They'll probably come up there. Yeah.
So we can add that to the agenda for that item, for that workshop. Okay, good. So thank you, Jeremy, and staff, and let's take a 5-minute break.
The July, the special board meeting hasn't been set, but that'll be the full board as soon as we can pull the members.
So Jeremy, why wasn't Franklin Roosevelt on the list?
There are 2 Roosevelts. We didn't want to confuse anybody.
Well, he had Cleveland and he was there twice.
Oh, that's true. And there were 2 Harrisons too.
Yes,
Yeah,
we got
that occurred to me too. Yeah.
But I saw you could have started, it was Cleveland's second time you started. Harrison, we could clean him, so let's clear on that. I know, was a political statement, New Deal concern, or?
That's why I look older, not more recent.
So I was more saying state deal with that. So you want me to? No, I would love to have I'm not too sure. It seems like it lasts the duration of plenty of energy, good enough money. Oh, can you name, well, we have the plans this week. He could probably so you could yeah. And what's oh yes. Well, welcome to you. I just want to pay for it. No, with the
Next week. It's my last day for Actually, hold on, let's see where it's being held. It's not a district. Oh, they move around.
Yeah, no, I'm listening. Basically, I will not put any cash budget. She's just done getting it. I'm just now. It is pretty cool. I think what you're saying is I'm not there. Yeah, the trees were no results. Yeah.
That's a good sign.
Private capacity of that. I'm not great right now.
You're on your own private side. Oh, yeah. Yeah, but you should come. I figured you might want to
Same people, but
pretty much.
yeah, you're full. Did he get two?
No, this week.
Yeah.
Just wait those Thursday.
Yeah, ain't that a lot of,
Maybe St. Louis will all better for you to pick the 16. Just focus primarily how rare is that?
Are there any that are in that position simply because the bond authority hasn't come out to
They have one. Well, they did. Yeah, basically, whatever it shows us. I know one's on the small. Yeah, that's right. There's 18 months. It doesn't start until they file their 50-5. It doesn't start until the board actually has the certification. Oh, okay. Now let's look at that. And fund this.
Okay, let's go ahead and get started. I think we got a couple of people that are still out in the hall. But our next item is methods for accepting applications beyond bond authority, also known as unfunded list item. So here from OPSC is Brian Odell, and he's going to walk you through this item. We've obviously talked about this either two times previously, I believe. We have, OPSC is working to prepare and complete an item for the May State Allocation Board. So that'll be on the agenda in May. And I do want to make sure, as we go into this, that when we look at what Brian's going to show us in terms of the updated graphic, the current 1859.95 reg is the default. If the board takes no action to change that, then the unfunded list would be kept in accordance with those regulations. So I'm going to turn it over to Brian Odell.
Good morning. So the purpose of this item is to sort of recap and summarize the last few discussions we've had on this topic, and just to mention that we are going to take this to the May board for a full item. It started at the February State Allocation Board meeting, where OPSC staff was directed to bring this discussion forth. We had discussions at the March and the April committee meetings, got feedback on different types of lists that could be generated to track the application submitted to OPSC once new construction, which could also apply to other programs, but right now we're looking at new construction bond authority is exhausted. So if we turn to page 21, there is the chart. It's the very last page. If you printed it out on the web page, this is a separate line. It just says attachment right under agenda. So if you don't have it, for those who are watching on the webcast, that's where it's located. It went out afterwards. So right now at the top is the current process, which is according to the regulations.
Right, it didn't go online. That's right.
That once there's no more authority for an application, OPSC would create an unfunded list, which is just an informational list. The application is fully processed, 15-day, 4-day letters, and then it goes before the board for approval. It just doesn't receive an apportionment, so it wouldn't be eligible for the unfunded rounds, or the PIF rounds that we've been talking about. And so if we look down below that, we list 4 options that we discussed. Option 1 is, instead of doing all of that, because the board did want a way to track all of these applications, so if it didn't have that unfunded list, what else could it have? So we looked at our current process and started looking at different lists that we create and thought, what else would be available to the board? The first one is the OPSC workload list, which is just district submits an application, goes through the ART process, so there's DSA, CDE approval letters. Once all of that is verified, it gets an application number, and then it moves to the workload list, which gets published. So that's one option. Option 2 would be modifying that, where instead of just being published on the workload list, it would also go to the state allocation board, and they would acknowledge it. One of the differences between that and the unfunded list that would be created through the regulations is that these projects aren't fully processed, so there's no 15-day, 4-day letter, so the grant amounts would be very estimated, and there could be additional issues within the project that haven't been identified until a full review is completed. Option 3 would be to, OPSC does conduct the full review, so we have more of a finalized grant amount that it would be eligible for if there was authority, and that gets, that would be called a ready for SAB approval list, and that would be new. Option 3 wouldn't be, sorry, I forgot, what's the difference between 3 and 4?
With no board approval.
With no board approval, so it wouldn't go to the board. It would just be an acknowledgement.
That's correct.
Option 4, thank you. Option 4 does have the full review. It does go to the board, so it's very much like the unfunded list that would be created through the current regulations. The difference, though, is that in order to address some of the concerns that an unfunded list would create a potential liability for the state, make some small modifications to it, such as renaming it for a project list or some other name, and also that there would be an acknowledgement from the district that being placed on this list doesn't actually guarantee state funding. Last meeting, we talked about a specific board resolution for each project, and some concerns were raised. So in the interest of presenting to the board, the idea is we just lay out options, just mention that there could be some type of acknowledgement, may not be a board resolution, could be other things, and if the board was interested in that, then we would come up with the specific steps that districts would do, and of course I'm assuming that that would also involve the implementation committee as well. So that's what we're trying to do for the May board, and that's all. Thank you.
Yes.
I guess I'm just a little concerned, because when this was presented before, there were 5 options, and one of the options, option number 4, was status quo. And now, is it that they're not going to be allowed that option? Or?
No, that's the default option. If the board takes no action to change that, or adopt a new list, then the regulations that are currently in effect under 1859.95 would be in effect.
So shouldn't that be included as one of the options?
Well, I think it
leave well enough alone?
Yeah, just it's on the natural. It's there.
I'm just worried that this is forcing them to choose one of these 4 options, and especially since we've been talking very favorably about what used to be option 4, and now we have a new option 4. Just a little concerned about that.
We're still drafting the item, but we're making it very clear that the default option spelled out in regulation was the previous option 4 to create that true unfunded list. So what we're providing to the board is just other options should they choose to make a motion to do something different.
Well, the other thing that was nice about the way they were laid out, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, is that you could see where the existing option occurred relative to these other options, and you could see how great the change was if you selected options 1 or 2 as opposed to 3 or 5.
And I think I can appreciate that, and I liked the way that it kind of cascaded across the page, and visually you could really understand differences in processing times and amounts of processing, differences in approval steps. But I do think it's important in the context of some of the issues that the board has faced previously when related to taking no action. If the board if you put all 5 options out, let's say we put all 5 options out for the board. What if the board was unable to get 6 votes to adopt any of the 5 options? That would, in effect, mean that the board took no action, and by taking no action, regulation section 1859.95 would be still in effect, but that would have been an option that the board couldn't get a positive vote for. It's a problem. So it's more appropriate to structure it the way it's being structured here, because what we're bringing to the board are 4 different options other than the current regulation.
Just a suggestion then, if it could be laid out on the page, and you put the current process in between options 3 and 4. Is that possible?
The top section, the current process, parallels the bottom, and that is the current process, the default
But could
option.
it be inserted in between option 3 and 4? So visually, you see where the current process fits within the options that are proposed. And it's just that I'm looking in, if I'm thinking I want to be as moderate as possible, I'm going to pick one of the ones on either side of the current process rather than going to a more radical position like option 1 or 2.
So maybe we go option 1, option 2, option 3, default, and then option 4.
Well, you listed it right here as current process, so I don't know why wouldn't you just take this little bar and put it right in between these two, just visually, so they could see how the current process fits in with the options. Just a suggestion.
Dennis?
In the process of presenting this, are you going to express the committee's opinions on this?
Always.
The fact,
Definitely.
I think at the last meeting, the vast majority of us went for the current process, did we not? That is now labeled as a current process.
And actually, if you look at the paragraph under description, most committee members expressed a preference for OPSC to continue accepting funding applications and, the way they are under our 1859-95, and then it says a desire was expressed by one committee for a different approach. So I think we're going to try and represent as best we can what the sense of the committee was, and yes, definitely.
The workload list is unverified information, right? That's just submitted?
That's correct.
So someone could submit for $20 million and be eligible for 0?
Correct.
Okay, so it's only, option 3 is the only place where there's a...
Well, I think that, Fred,
option 3 for current.
An application, correct me if I'm wrong since I'm not in that department, an application that comes in with a 5004 is going to be checked to at least to some basic levels before it goes on the workload list to see that it's a real application that meets the criteria and contains all of the elements necessary for processing. It may overstate the funds or it may have other things, but at least it would be an application that met OPSC's criteria and standards for processing, which means it's got to be somewhere near the ballpark. It can't be out in the parking lot, right?
Is that what ART does? They at least take a...
Yeah, why don't you clarify?
An initial view of, you're in the same zip code as the project or something?
What happens during the ART process, part of it is to look at the 5004 and then to match the DSA approval letters along with the plans and specs, match the CDE approval letters, make sure they're relevant, make sure they're current, some of those basic things. A full review does take much longer. I think what Michael was talking about, potentially the application would be eligible for $0. That would be an extreme case where there was a fatal flaw that just wasn't known until maybe two months later. But that's very rare. Generally, once it goes through the ART process, and which is the purpose of the entire process, is to say, this is a viable project. Let's go ahead and take the time to really start going through to finalize the numbers.
Okay.
Bill, I'm sorry I missed last meeting, so I didn't get a chance to look at the video. I know that because that's must-see TV. The reason why this is even coming is because the board some board members had concerns about that they were going to be seen as promising things, and there was a liability exposure there, right, for funding. So did our committee last month express, so you said current process is the one where most of us said, and then is there a way to say, and acknowledging your concerns, that we would like option 4, for example, because that's the closest thing that we could get to, and we believe it addresses the issue, the concerns? was that, I don't know whether that can be said, or, I guess that's what I'm...
Well, that was an issue that I raised. There is a lot of concern within the legislature about the term unfunded. And option 4 is the closest to the current process with changing. And I was just actually pulling up the regs to see if they actually need to be changed, and they would, because they use the term unfunded list. So we'd have to change that terminology in the reg in some capacity. I'm just not sure what the rest of the committee wants to do. But I think it would address the legislature's concern to do something like an SAB-approved project list is what I've offered up before.
And obviously we tried to incorporate that in option 4. And I do want to, I think the issue of, we had a lengthy discussion last time about some of the concerns of IMP committee members' districts regarding board certifications or board acknowledgements and that kind of thing. That there were definite concerns about that. I think we heard that. The flip side of that is I think it's also possible that we may want to make sure that we have maybe another level of acknowledgement or by school districts that the two concerns that we have heard from the legislature, which is no guarantee of state funding, and secondly, that the program may change and that the grant funding amounts that are shown on an unfunded list may change, may be lower under a new program. So even if we kept the current process, it may be that the board would consider some additional acknowledgments or certifications of some kind that would address those issues as part of that. Okay. Yes.
In the write-up here, it says the next steps, the OPSC will be presenting the 5 options presented at the April committee meeting.
Thank you, Paul. We're working on it. All right, so hearing no further discussion, great job, Brian. And I think that, did we, someone from the audience has come up.
Lyle Smoot, LLC. I was waiting for your invitation.
Did you say, is that Lyle Smoot, LL Bean? No, I'm sorry.
LL Bean, very good. Actually, this is Cabela's, so,
Sorry.
Okay, Lyle Smoot, representing Lyle Smoot Consulting, LLC again. Thank you very much. I just feel a necessity to throw this one on the table because I'd like you to include in each of these recommendations the law that you are interpreting or clarifying, because I don't believe the law says you cannot have the board review and approve an application. In fact, I think the law is very clear. It says the district can submit an application at any time, and the board shall review and approve the application. Now, what you call the list of that project once it's done is irrelevant, but I don't think you have the authority to establish a regulation that says we're not going to have the board review and approve applications. So I think you're going to run right into a brick wall right there if you don't have some kind of way to circumvent, and I'm being blunt here, that law. I think you can call it the new step number 4, where you can have the current one, but you can't get around the fact that the law says the board shall review and approve applications that are submitted.
So can you, I'm just a layman here, so are you saying, in your opening statement, you said you're concerned that a regulation that might be developed implementing, say, option 1.
Right.
Would essentially be a regulation that wouldn't be in accordance with the law under which the regulation, that governs the regulations?
Exactly.
Okay.
That's an important point. Do you know which law states that? Because that's relevant.
We're looking at,
I'd like to include it if possible.
I mean,
please do.
You read the law, it's pretty clear. It says, when you get it through all the stuff, it says the district can, as soon as they've established their eligibility through the process, they can submit an application at any time, and then it goes on and says the board shall review and approve the application, and then it says, subject to the availability of funds, the board shall make an apportionment. See, so I mean, in SB 50, all of these things were contemplated. as far as I'm concerned. If you just read the law and follow what the law says, it was contemplated that you could submit your application, the board will review it and approve it, and then whenever they get money, they'll make an apportionment. So I'm just saying, I'd like to see the law that you're going to say you're going to point to that says the board isn't going to review and approve that application when it's submitted.
So the default or current process appears to be in accordance with the law.
The current process is in accordance with the law, and it was very clearly that way because it was in accordance with the law as far as I'm concerned. Number 4, option number 4, clearly is within the law because it says the board's going to review and approve the application, and then you're going to create a list and call it something else. And I don't think the law was anticipating what you're going to call the list. For that matter, I'm not sure that it says you have to have a list, but it says you have to have the board review and approve the application. So I think to say that you're not going to have the board do that because they don't have bond authority is contrary to what the law says.
Well, thank you for bringing that up. And
I'd be glad to send you the code sections.
Well, we obviously know where they are.
Thanks.
So. Yes, Joe.
Are we going to, you were talking about an additional signature or school board review, or where are we on that? No? Is that option 4?
Well,
because right now, the superintendent and one other person are the district designees. Isn't that good enough?
Well, it wasn't as an individual who would be doing a certification. I think the issue that we're trying to address is that there are concerns that were raised regarding that the list, if you will, creates a guarantee of future funding, which we want to make sure that districts understand that's not the case, even though it currently appears on various forms already. But and there was also a second concern that the program is changing and that the grant amounts that are identified in an unfunded list as we go forward that's beyond a bond authority would essentially be funded under a new program, and what if the program grant amounts or the state and local matching shares change, and therefore the anticipated apportionment from a previous program has to be reduced.
Is that on the agenda?
That's what's, I mean, we did talk about that last time. You weren't here, you weren't at that meeting.
And just to be clear, we're not bringing forth reg changes that would implement all of these options. They would all require reg changes. We're just laying out the options to get direction. If the board picks one or maybe even multiple options, then we would develop some regs to actually look at the mechanics to see how that would work. Right now, we're just getting overall direction because that was what the board told us to do, not to bring back regs, get direction, get feedback, and then see what the committee and the
stakeholders potentially, if there was a change or we needed to develop regs, we'd bring them back and have the committee take a look at them at that time.
I'm sorry I missed last time. So what did the group decide as a recommendation for?
I guess I could characterize that.
No, just sum it up like board approval or superintendent.
No, there was not a lot of interest among the school board stakeholders, school district stakeholders to having school board approval.
Okay. So we're good. Okay.
But that doesn't mean I think we may still look at something more robust than we have now. I guess I'm trying to get everybody ready for it. We want to address the concerns that we had from the State Allocation Board, and so we're trying to figure out how to do that. Certainly, I think we all heard what the input from the stakeholders was, that it created, especially going back to the school board, the scenario that we heard that people didn't like was, I got to stand up in front of my board in public and say, you know, I might not get funded. You have to certify board that you know we may not get funded for this, and what we get is going to may be a lot less. It creates a lot of issues related to public perception and people not understanding the process, who say, look, you're not going to get state funding, things like that. So we had a very long discussion of those concerns. I certainly hear them, but I think there are, on the other hand, we have to balance that with some of the concerns that we've heard from the allocation board about wanting to make sure we aren't making promises that we can't keep as a state. Okay. So stay tuned. We'll be publishing this item and taking it to the allocation board for the meeting on May 23rd. And so let's go on, and we're still, it looks like we still might make it for okay, let's have Mr. Odell review the next item, which is PIW improvements, and then we can talk about that.
Okay. Page 14 of the agenda is improvements to the project information worksheet. So this is to summarize what staff will be taking to the May board as a result of the board directing staff to talk about 3 issues. One is streamlining the project information worksheet. The second is to look at reducing the number of required submittals. And the third is to potentially look at ways to collect data on other programs beyond just new construction. So we had several discussions at the implementation committee about that. As far as streamlining the PIW, if you look at attachment A, which is on page 16, 17, 18, and 19, we've identified the fields that can be auto-populated or auto-calculated. So the goal is to make it easier. A district opens up the online worksheet, they enter in basic information, project number, some things pop up, there's a verification screen where they say, yes, we have the correct project, but the district name, county, the state apportionment, and some of the details relating to that OPSC already has within our computer system would automatically go into the project information worksheet. Also on page 17, there's also the net usable acres. That's the other thing that we capture electronically that it would auto-populate. And everything that you see in yellow would be things that are auto-calculated within the worksheet. So it would be, if it asks for a total of something based on the 5 or 6 different amounts that were just entered, the system would automatically do that. You don't have yellow? Okay.
There's an agenda over there, Adams. Want to get them on?
No, that's okay. That's fine. That's fine. We've talked about this for months.
And then on page 19, regarding the high performance incentive grant information, that's additional information that can be auto-populated, state grant amount, financial hardship, things like that. And this is something that can be done without a regulation change, because we're not actually modifying the form, just modifying the online submittal process. The second thing is to reduce the number of required submittals, which there's attachment B, which is found on page 20, lists the different options. You can see the same thought process where we have current at the top and then the options that, all of which would require small regulatory amendments to implement in any of these 3 options. The first one would be to remove the requirement at the 5005 stage. So we would still get a PIW at the first 5006 expenditure report, which is 1 year after the 5005, and also with the final 5006 when the district indicates that the expenditures or the project is 100% complete. Option 2 would, the 5005 requirement would still be there, but we would remove the 5006 requirement, but keep the final one. So you get at the beginning and end of the project life. Option 3 is sort of a hybrid of option 2, where it basically says, okay, if you submit the 5005, the PIW, and the 5006 that says it's 100% complete, so it's a reimbursement, it's been on the unfunded list for hopefully not too long, but for quite a while, project is done, that's all we need. So just don't worry about submit. If you have to submit other paperwork, that's fine, but no more PIWs. Unless you find some other expenditures and you want to amend the 5006, you have some more costs, then go ahead and update the PIW at that point. But unless you have anything else, we'll get it all in one shot. Again, all of those would require small regulatory changes, and they will be presented at the May board. And the last thing that we're asked to look at is potentially using the PIW to collect data for projects other than just new construction. And we talked about it, and it seemed obvious that in order to do that, you couldn't just modify some of the questions very simply to capture it. You'd have to maybe add new sections, really reorganize the questions. For example, modernization projects, the square footages and things like that would be irrelevant to a lot of modernization projects. So we'd have to take a whole new approach to that if that's what the board wants us to look at. So essentially, that's what the item is going to be.
Well, and I think it's important to note that there is one other element of the work of the PIW. If you go to page 19, the high performance section of the PIW, we held a meeting with with the agency CDE, DSA, OPSC, Allocation Board, and legislative staff to discuss the data collection issues and actually certification and verification of projects that receive high performance incentive grant funding. And we spent some time discussing ways that this page could be made more appropriate in terms of the data that's being asked for and the information. And so this is an area that we'll be confirming with the board that they want us to go forward with, but it's going to require a whole, there's some work that needs to be done here. It's very clear, as an example, if you look at question below the boxes down there, energy savings, for example. Well, I'll get there in a second, Mr. Bakke, yes, thank you. But energy savings, we asked the question on here in terms of a dollar amount of energy savings. A dollar amount of energy savings for a high-performance project is highly subjective in relation to individual school district energy rates that they're paying, and so it may be the fact that we're asking the wrong question. What we should be asking is, for example, and this is what we discussed at our meeting on Monday, was we should be asking for the energy use index for the KBTU per square foot per year for the school under the base case, or its benchmarked case, and then the KBTU per square foot per year under the high performance case. And guess what? We already collect that data from Mr. Conrad's agency, the Division of the State Architect, on the HP1. So then this comes back to this notion that we looked at in the first round of changes. We find a way to auto-populate using that information. Then the data that we collect for the state is what are the net energy savings in KBTU per square foot per year that we're generating through the high performance school program, and that's a more realistic and usable set of information. So I got off on that long tangent, and I apologize. It's one of my favorite topics, but I think it's an area where this page, we still need to do some work on this page in the context of the original direction from the board, which was to streamline and find ways to make the data collection more usable. Mr. Dixon.
Thank you, Mr. Savage. You know, not that I like anything about this, really, but if we're going to change it, can we get stakeholder input on the changes? I know last time
we have been doing that.
Have we with school districts?
Yes, sir.
Okay, because me as a school district, I'm looking at option 2. You know, we scramble on the 90 days to get contracts signed and get our 5005s in, and now, of course, we have the DIR CMU issue. I mean, so I would say, boy, I wouldn't want anything else to do, you know, when we do our fund release.
Are you actually talking about what's listed as option 1, which is a no 5005 submittal?
No, I'm looking at option 2, where you would also do your first PIW. I'm just saying, why would you add more? We have a tough time meeting that.
You don't like option 2 is what you're saying?
Yeah, I don't like it. I'm sorry, did I say I liked it? I said I didn't like any of it.
I was just confused. I just want to make sure I get
but we have had stakeholder input? meetings, or was
Mr.
it?
Rocky, do you want to share with him some of your input?
Well, I've been talking about that, yeah, that's an issue for us. We just, the problem we have is around the fact that we don't control the timeline anymore. You know, the state controls that when the funds become available, and then having to scramble to put all those together in a very short, condensed period of time is extremely difficult. So we completely, yeah. Are you done? Because I had a question.
Well, it's always good to have LA on your side.
I'll get you a bottle of wine, too. One question. This isn't done, per se. I mean, we're going to come back and continue to talk about it, because we had raised in the original meetings a number of issues with regards to the questions, just like Bill kind of alluded to with the student achievement and those issues. I know we talked a little bit, not as much, about joint use and what that was being asked about. There's a number of different issues, so I was just hoping to make sure for the record that this isn't a done issue because it's going to this board with some changes, but it's going to be coming back to discuss other changes we talked about as well.
And I believe that that is the case, and then I think part of what we'll be doing at the May meeting is presenting the item to the board and having the board confirm that they want us to continue to streamline and make progress in terms of having the PIW be a better instrument for data collection for the state. Yes.
Since option 3 is basically just adding to option 2, Joe, is option 1 preferable to option 2?
Yes.
Then maybe we need an option 3A or 3B. Maybe there's really only 2 options, because the option 3 is really what happens if a project is just a reimbursement project, and it may be confusing as really a third option. We really only have the 2 options, option 1 and option 2, and on both option 1 and option 2, you would follow the same procedure with the non-reimbursement. I mean, the reimbursement projects, I'm sorry. Is that? And bottom line, in both cases, I think the description of the options that you've listed here do a lot better job of describing what happens than the chart. The chart is, to me, very confusing. But.
So give me an idea where you're talking. What page is the description on?
On page 15, it has the option 1 and the option 2. And then the option 3 is basically option 2 with the caveat that if the project is already reimbursed, that you'll have to fill out less PIWs.
You're right about the option 3 really is a sub-option, if you will, for almost anything. Right. I think we're proposing that anytime there's a reimbursement, that this option 3 would really get tagged on to almost any approach that we do. Am I incorrect in that, or?
But in Joe's case, if he's preferring option 1, then we really should have a sub-option of that of option.
And if I could, Bill, the point for me, and I think Eric was saying the same thing, is just...
Yes, he was.
Yeah, when we're doing the fund release, adding additional work is problematic for us, that's all.
Here's I guess, let me just make sure I can express the best that I can. I think that there's the submittal of the PIW with the 5005, let's see, how can I say this correctly? I think because it's tagged to a fund release, the state there's a much higher data collection rate. I mean, in other words, we get more of the submittals when they're tagged to a fund release.
I'll agree you get more submittals. I don't know if you get any good data to use.
Okay. I'll stand corrected. Yes, ma'am.
On option 1, option 1 and 2, I just a little corrections, I think, where it says second PIW required, shouldn't that be first? on the, I'm looking at option 1, go across, and you're saying no PIW, then, so it should be first and then second.
It should indeed.
And then the same thing on option 2, it should be first and second way over there, just as a matter of correcting if there's any confusion. And I would just add to that I would agree with Joe and others and Eric about not requiring any more than we have to at the 90-day, at the fund release thing, fund release time, so I would be going with option 1. I'd rather just have 1 PIW or 0 PIWs, but if you, so I would go, final, but I know that you need to have the data earlier, or you'd like to have some kind of data, whether it's accurate or not, and so option 1 would be the preferred for me too.
Yeah, again, I think option 1 also serves OPSC well, too. I mean, that's a large volume of work that comes in a very short period of time. How many projects are approved, or, when funding comes in?
We're just talking about new construction, because any mods or anything like that, you wouldn't have a PIW anyways, unless it was HPI.
We were talking about that in the last month, tying it to mod. Are we not going in that direction? I don't remember.
Well,
Why would you even bring that up?
I just want to make sure we're all clear.
I'm happy that you did bring that up, Mr. Bakke, and you're going to get me going again. I think one of the charges, and it was reflected in the item, one of the charges that the board gave us is, should we have this data collection go to other programs in like modernization? I think that there is an interest, and I think that school districts have an interest in that they're being short-sighted by not wanting to collect information and data, but we certainly have an interest in understanding, for example, modernization. What does it cost to modernize a school? What is the scope of work that a district was able to accomplish? What was the district's share of modernizing a school? What was the total project cost of a modernization? So it was one of the charges. We haven't gone there yet. One of the things that I was looking at as I look at this form, and I spent a lot of time looking at this thing, amazingly enough, is that the thing that you just mentioned about joint use, really that's a single program where you're asking a new set of questions. Perhaps if when the district goes in and puts in the project number, it would automatically click on, let's say you put in a 57 prefix, is that modernization? Yes. So let's say you put in a 57 prefix, boom, instead of where it says joint use at the bottom, it clicks down the modernization section and asks you the modernization scope of work, or whatever the questions are. I think that this was part of the original charge of the board. We're taking the short-term stuff now, but I think we need to engage in a conversation about what data we want to have and go forward.
I don't think you'll find a district would oppose the idea of trying to collect data. I think the challenge is, and I think the board would appreciate, is that the questions actually provide some fruitful information so that we can actually create a inventory, if you want to say, of what our school facilities look like and what we're doing and how we're doing it. Before we even jump into modernization, I think we need to have a better understanding of how we're doing it under the new construction program. And I don't think we're there yet to entertain modernization or any other conversation about other programs until we kind of clean up the types of questions and how we're asking under new construction. I think there's a lot of, I think the streamlining and the efforts that OPSC has done have been tremendous. I mean, I think I thank you for that. I still think we have some more work to do, and I want us to continue that work before we start expanding it to other programs at the time being.
And I do think it would be important for you to express that to the board, that we keep working on it. Yes.
My question would be, going back to what Joe asked at the beginning, is I'm curious as to what stakeholder venues you've had besides this area, because 2 meetings ago we sort of painfully started going down line items. I actually think that's very useful, because I think staff probably learned a lot, and we learned a lot about what we think might be useful, especially from the practitioners' points of view. And I'm not sure whether that's happening. I guess I'm not aware of that happening, and I'm curious as to what you folks are doing on that.
The original PIW was created with stakeholder input and then tested out in the field before we implemented it. Going forward, just so we're clear, we're definitely interested in seeing this line-by-line crawl, but where we're at right now and going towards the May board is we're going to take forward these short-term options that the board, that we can address right away and look at the submittal requirements. The board has to get feedback on expanding the other programs, so we'll bring the IMPS committee's discussion on that and the challenges that the questions don't address that problem, and then re-clarify with the board that where do they want us to go next? Do they want us to do this line-by-line crawl? Because we know it's going to be a labor-intensive progress. As Bill mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, over the next 2 months, we have 3 new subcommittee meetings, we have a new special board meeting, and we have an audit working group all dumped onto our workload. So that's definitely a challenge for staff. So we just want to re-clarify with the board that that's where they want to dedicate their time.
Yes, sir.
Actually, Michael, you probably don't know this, but Josh from OPSC came down to Capistrano when I was working there in a district in Northern California, and we put together a PIW that was completely dismissed. That was the first one. There was no stakeholder input. Let's make sure our county offices get involved with this, too.
Thank you, Joe.
I think the first PIW that went to the board said no, go back and get more stakeholder input. And a board or two later, it was overhauled and it looks like what it is now. So it looks like, I think there's room for improvement, and maybe after having used it for several years, we have a better handle on the type of questions that need to be asked and things like that. I think part of the reason to move forward with this board item now is that line-by-line crawl, all of that will take a very long time. If the board can eliminate a submittal requirement now, we can move forward with that reg change. How many PIWs won't have to be submitted? In the meantime, how many PIF rounds? If we wait until we have everything all in one shot, that could be a very long time from now. So let's look at what we can do now. Eliminate one PIW up to the board, auto-populate, auto-calculate. All that can be done while this other work is still going on. So that was the intent.
Great. Yes.
So is there pretty much consensus that it's option 1 with the additional lesser requirements for a reimbursement project?
Well, what I heard, what I just wrote down was that most members of the IMP committee felt that option 1 was the best approach.
But do they need a SAB approval for to do the elements of option 3? Because it sounds
all of them would require a reg change. Oh, option 3.
Because it sounds like if you go with option 1 or 2, we all still want the option 3 as well.
The option 3 is kind of built into option 1. If you're submitting your first PIW and it's 100%, you're done already. So it's already built into that.
I think the intent was to make it very clear that this is exactly what would happen. The regs would say, if it's the final, then no more, and if we only get one PIW, then that's just fine. Just to make it very clear to everyone.
And Bill, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
See there. It's important because that way you don't get caught into defining what is done. We just decide as a district, is this our first and only expenditure report? Or might we have a couple more? Even if someone else considers it a reimbursement, I might still have some expenditures.
99%.
99.9%.
All right. Thank you, Brian. And are there any other comments? Or here we go. Mr. Smith?
Can I just say, I don't know, Bill, if you put any rationale as to why option 1, but it also makes sense from my perspective. When I submit the fund release, it doesn't go hand in hand with any budgetary figures, whereas with the expenditure report, I always have the detailed list of project expenditures attached and handy, and I'm already putting together a lot of data relative to the cost of the project, and it's there.
Well, and we heard, I think we heard the workload issue, right, related to multiple funding applications and the timing of the fund releases, the 90 days, and the additional workload there. And so that's the other, the sort of the validity of the data, I think, is what, one thing you're saying also, is it? Okay. So did you get that, Brian? Thank you. Mr. Smoot?
Thank you. As I recall, there was a substantial amount of discussion about this kind of, this page 20, regarding a single submittal as being submitted with the final expenditure report, and it's not reflected here at all, and I'm wondering why not. Why is that not an option that the board should discuss, one submittal, regardless of what it looks like? I like the idea that we're going to come back and talk more about what it looks like, but why is there not a discussion about a single submittal with the final 5006, which I think, I'm not going to put words in everybody else's mouth, but I think a lot of districts would say a single submittal makes a lot more sense, because there's a lot of stuff here that really has no value until the final submittal of the 5006. Thank you.
No, we definitely heard that in at least one of the meetings that we discussed the submittal issue with. I think it's I would struggle with having just a single submittal because of the time lag between, for receiving any kind of data on the projects is so long that it's just difficult to justify, and I think the most important thing from is to have something that starts, that represents an initial milestone of information about the project, and then a final closeout piece that's adjusted. I mean, if you look at the timeframes that are expressed on here, 2 to 3 years, that's a long time to wait to get any information on a project, and have that in the sort of
But if that's the first time valid information is available, there you go. And I understand your concern, Bill, but the thing is, we discussed it here, and I think a lot of people were supportive of it, and it's not even put before the board as an option.
I accept that criticism that it's not here.
Thank you.
It didn't seem, I mean, to be honest with you, what I'd prefer to that had been the case is that we could have all agreed on something simple and not have the board have to go through a lot of discussions, but just have them say, yeah, we accept that you're going to remove one submittal and, whatever. But part of our job is to, as the IMP committee, is to try and have these discussions and iron things out and reach some consensus, and then take a direction to the board so they don't have to go through a huge discussion that's taken us, 3 meetings already? About, and not that we discussed the submittals at all 3 meetings, or all full time. And I just don't see, what's that?
We can have a long discussion.
I'm sure we can have a long conversation about that.
It seems to me like we ferret out all the information here so that when it does go to the board, it's boom, 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 boom. Here are the options. Here are the reasons for pro and con. The board doesn't have to go through all those discussions, but to say you're going to throw out an option,
okay, no,
makes no sense to me.
I accept that, and so maybe we should talk internally about having that on here also.
Thanks.
Sure. Yes.
And I would agree with Lyle. I think that's, having only one submittal is something, to have good, accurate information. If you do it at the 5005, there are a lot of projects out there that are multi-prime contracts that have only 50% of the contracts under, or 50% of the work under contract, and you're guessing at the rest of it. I think that skews the numbers. I think the only legitimate accurate numbers are at the end, and I think we discussed that, and I think it's something that the board should know about.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah, in a time when our funds are very tight, I think an option that would reduce costs for both OPSC and the school districts should be offered up.
Yes.
I would disagree with what's been said on that. Also, it's not, you are getting PIWs right now submitted, correct, on projects that are ongoing. So it feels like what you're saying is, look at this huge gap of time, but in fact, projects are getting funded, and you are getting PIWs all throughout the year. It's all going to continue. It's just that you've have it later for the late, projects from now on. So it's not like there's a gap where you're not getting data. You are getting data right now.
Well, if we remove the first two requirements, we wouldn't be getting them all throughout. I'm not discounting that completely, but just if we take a look at it, we would only be getting it for the projects that would be 100% complete. I think it's relevant. I'm not discounting that at all, but just everything would change, require all of the submittal process and the timelines and the numbers that we get and all that.
I'm just saying you have projects that are being completed right now, so you'll get the data for those completed projects. They're ongoing. It's not that everybody's back at the beginning stage. Everything's happening in...
Yes, sir.
I just think that, you're looking for timely data, and we're really looking at the wrong place for timely data. The information in terms of cost per square foot for indexes and that, there are professional systems out there that do that far better than this can do that. For long-term information on what the program is doing in terms of square foot per student and that, it's not that critical to have it at the time that you do the 5005. It can be done a couple of years later.
Okay. All right, thank you, Brian. Thanks, OPSC staff, and thank you, everybody, for coming today, and we'll see you at our next meeting. So we're adjourned in time for lunch.